Oh, man.
We're live. What's up?
I'm not logged in, so when you leave, I think it's going to end.
I will leave and go on my phone. It'll be fine.
Okay.
I'll let you go. All right. 3, 2, 1. Adam's here to talk about his thoughts on the biggest win of the season for the Denver Nuggets. We'll get into the big picture for Denver in this last little bit of games now that they've effectively clinched the 1 seed. Plus, we'll take you through a preview of their game versus the Toronto Raptors on Monday night. All this and more on Locked On Nuggets.
You're in control.
You are Locked On Nuggets, your daily Denver Nuggets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to Locked On Nuggets, your daily Denver Nuggets podcast, part of the Locked On Network, your team every day. Thanks for making us your first listen. We appreciate you guys joining us on all platforms, whether it's on YouTube, hanging out with folks in the comments section. We appreciate you guys chilling while we got started here. Or if you listen to us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get podcasts, we appreciate you guys making us part of your lives. We appreciate you guys being part of our community. On today's show, we're going to talk about the Denver Nuggets win over the Memphis Grizzlies. I did a post-game show over the weekend, but want to get Adam's thoughts on that game. We're going to talk about the game versus the Toronto Raptors on Monday night, preview that game a little bit. And Adam's going to give you a little bit of an insight into what the big picture is for Denver the rest of the way. Today's episode is brought to you by PrizePicks. First-time users can receive a 100% instant deposit match up to $100 with promo code LOCKEDON. That's prizepicks.com, promo code LOCKEDON. Adam, let's not waste any time. So on Friday, the Denver Nuggets got their... I've described it as it's not the biggest win of the season, but it was the most important from a practical sense. Like securing that win, I went ahead and called it. They're going to be the 1 seed, especially after the Grizzlies lost to the Clippers on Sunday. They are now up 6 in the loss column with tiebreaker. That's effectively 7 games. There is no mathematical way without the Nuggets completely falling into a black hole that they are not going to secure the 1 seed. When you watch that game, obviously, folks have had time to listen to the DNVR postgame show. Have you done a rewatch on it? Is my first question for you.
I actually have not. No.
When I went back and did a rewatch, like my big takeaway, honestly, was like Bruce Brown again stood out to me. Like that, if that winds up being a matchup, I don't think it's likely, but if it winds up being a playoff matchup, I think Bruce Brown. That's a good series for him. He matches up well with Memphis's guards. He had that was a really strong performance from Bruce Brown. They needed to see that, I think.
Well, I mean, he was great in this game, and so I'm kind of interested, having not rewatched it. What makes you think that versus – because one of my takeaways is Denver took this game very seriously, and we saw what it looks like when they were like, no, we need to win this one. We need to give our A game, A effort, all of those things. And I thought Bruce was one of the guys that was – but you feel like it wasn't just that. You felt like it was also a matchup?
Yeah, I also think that because Memphis doesn't have many large wings, like Dylan's 6'7", but he's not like built as like a 6'7" type player. And so like, there's not that size disadvantage that we've seen routinely this season where Bruce has struggled. The way that Memphis kind of runs their offense too, Ja is really the only straight line driver that they have on the team. Tyus is a lot more selective and careful and kind of like reads the court. Like he's just like a very Monte Morris, reads the floor general type point guard. And then Bane is a lot more of, he likes to operate off ball. And then when he does initiate offense, it's not necessarily a matter of him being able to just blow past Bruce Brown. So I thought the matchups there were very good for, Bruce, who's the plus minus hasn't been good for him this season without Jokic on the court. And a lot of the defensive stuff, a lot of us have commented like, wow, there's actually some real concerns there. Right. This was promising from the perspective of in a big spot, he was able to be really impactful.
Yeah. I'm interested in that theory. I agree with you that they don't have the big wings. I mean, this is a guard team and they're smaller guards, so maybe that really is just the straight matchup part of it. But my biggest takeaway from the game overall is just that we finally got to see what it looks like when Denver locks in. When they say like, no, we're going to give you our best punch. I mean, we talked earlier last week about what gear is Denver in, what gear is Jokic in. I think that was a game where for the fourth quarter they were in fifth gear, and the whole second half, I thought they were elevated, but in the fourth quarter, it was, let's lock in, let's throw our best punch, and the best punch was a knockout punch. I mean, that was the best. I think that was the best quarter of basketball they played all season.
Wow, that's a high bar.
I mean, they outscored them, 37-18 or something?
Yeah, they destroyed them. They destroyed them. Memphis fell to pieces, especially like the Denver defense did amazing work in that fourth quarter, just challenging everything. and really disrupting things.
And Jokic's defense in particular. And I think a lot of when we talk about Denver, like what gear is Denver in, we're really talking about what gear is Jokic in. And I thought he took this game seriously defensively the whole time, more so than we've seen at any point. He was just locked in defensively. So for me, it was a very encouraging one. And then Jamal Murray, I was so discouraged and disappointed with him in the first half because Dylan Brooks really was getting the better of him, and he just looked out of sorts. And I'm sitting here thinking, like, this is a contentious game. It's an important one. You're at home. Like, if you have a bad game in this one, I'm not going to say it's concerning, but it's like annoying. It's at the very least, it's annoying. And then the second half happened. And in particular, the fourth quarter happened where he went to that bubble level where he was hitting absurd shots, and he was doing it in a way that led you to believe this wasn't a hot streak. This was him focused, locked in, and intentional. And he just kind of had his way with him.
Yeah, it was a really amazing performance, and like seeing the being in the arena for it was absolutely incredible. I talked a lot about that on Saturday's show, that I wish you could have been in the arena for that one. Just because like it was the loudest MVP chants I've ever heard in the building. And it was the roar for Jamal when he was celebrating with the crowd was absolutely incredible. I think the bench unit continues to be a big question mark. There's been I got some comments on Saturday about, can we please see Thomas Bryant removed from the rotation and just go to AG at 5? And I want to stress that, like, you need you have to balance a very fine line, I think, between, because like Kerr even did this with the death lineup, which is like their go-to, which is you want to be able to use it enough to know how it operates and like be comfortable with it, but not use it so much that it wears out your power forward playing 5. And like, it will take a huge toll on Aaron Gordon in those minutes. Like
right.
he doesn't get to take a possession off rebounding.
I think it's interesting that they busted that one out in that game and haven't all year. So a couple weeks ago, Calvin Booth addressed the media, and he said that's the thing that's in our back pocket that we will do, or we were likely to do, but they hadn't really done it all year. And then they go now. I do think there's something too that's not a October, November, December strategy. It might not even be a January strategy, and maybe it's not even a February strategy. But I do think it's a March, April, May strategy.
A April problem.
You got to wait till fall, spring.
Yes.
It's fall, spring is when you bust it out. By the way, are we in fall, spring? I think we're starting to approach fall, spring.
We're approaching fall, spring, I think is a good way to say that. I would like it to get over 40 degrees for more than a day in order for me to really feel like it's fall, spring. I think I still kind of have some optimism for the bench, and I don't know why. I just kind of feel like, look, Reggie Jackson's career arc has been very weird. Okay. And Reggie Jackson may just simply like not fit. And he was a buyout player, and that just may not work. It just may not work this season. And he probably won't be here if it doesn't. At the same time, I just want to give those guys like a few more games. Like, I'm not at the same point that I was with other iterations of the bench where I was like, this is not working. This does not work. Like, they haven't played well, but I don't find like a functional problem when I watch where I'm like, this doesn't make any sense. They can't create anything. It feels more
shooting,
like execution and some of that kind of stuff. Yeah, maybe the shooting is a
Reggie, Bruce, Jeff Green, and Thomas Bryant. I'm shooting wise, and then Jamal Murray, has been staggering with them. To me, I look at that and I go, man, that's a very well below average shooting lineup.
Yeah. Evan says Reggie Jackson shooting 27% for us. He'll do better than that. We can debate how much, but it will look okay better than this. Probably, right? Like, it just doesn't seem likely that everybody's going to shoot 27% from the field. I think Thomas Bryant's pressing. That to me is pretty obvious.
Question.
Like, he's really struggling with it.
But I'm so curious for Thomas Bryant. I will say this. I'm much more confident in Thomas Bryant becoming like an impact player than I am Reggie Jackson. In part because I think Reggie Jackson's game, I mean, it is what it is. He's a volatile player. Like,
yeah, I know.
He's going to have great games. He's going to have some bad ones. But here's the one thing. Since Thomas Bryant arrived, he arrived in the Charlotte game. The Nuggets are 7-1.
Yeah.
And I know it's not because of Thomas Bryant, but it's also not in spite of him, which is an important thing when we talk about the bench. The Nuggets starters are going to win 9 out of 10 games for you.
I feel like they've only had one game where they've been like a double-digit minus.
The Memphis one they lost. Remember, the bench came. Yeah. The first subs is when it all fell apart. I mean, a lot of things happened in that game, but it started with the rotations.
Jamal post game, by the way, was very funny about that. By the way, it was really funny because me, I'm like, this is a huge game for standings and clinching the 1 seed and blah 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 blah. And like the Nuggets players to a man were basically like, no, it was a big game because they beat us last Saturday and we were pissed off about it. Like they were very much like, and Jamal like stopped himself. He's like, I gotta be careful. He's like, we didn't play as well as we can in that. Like he was essentially saying like, yeah, we weren't locked in that game. We knew we had the back-to-back versus the Clippers. And so we wanted to make sure that they understood, like we gave them that one and they're not getting this one. Danny says, man, I know you're being genuine. It's just hilarious as a Nuggets fan seeing this problem for 4 straight years and hearing, I just want to see a few more games. It's fair. It's just that in the absence of a logical conclusion, why the bench would be so bad over such a long span of time with such different iterations of it, in the absence of an overlying theory, and there are some, but nothing that I think is super convincing. I tend to be like, these are individual problems, and I see more upside with this unit than maybe some of the others.
I will say this though, Bones had a longer leash than Christian Brown by a lot. Reggie Jackson has a longer leash than Christian Brown by a lot. He's the guy he's replacing. Some of this is positionally, like a point guard has the ball in the hand or this that. But there were a lot of plays over the last week where I was like, I can't imagine Christian Brown making that decision or that play or that mistake and staying in the game. And then some of them were like compounding, like 2-3 in a row, and you were like, wow. I'm skeptical of Reggie Jackson. I think Malone's in a tight spot because he's a more traditional point guard, so it makes more sense to put him out there if that's the way you're going to do it. But it is a little bit weird to me to think about losing Christian Brown, who could be a useful, if not every game player, but like situationally. He could be like PJ Dozier was over the last few years, where it's like, you know what? It's nice to have another 6'7" defender that you can roll out there. And I just wonder if Christian Brown is going to have that choice now. And then you would, if you lost him to a guy that's like, yeah, but it fills a need, then I would get it. But I don't know that Reggie Jackson right now is filling a need with Murray staggering and with the way the team is playing. We'll see. Yeah, I'm with you. Give him some time, but that's my concern.
Yeah, I mean, that would be my answer is like, look, if you're going to play Reggie, then don't play Jamal. If you're going to play Jamal, then don't play Reggie. Right. Like if you're going to stagger Jamal, you don't need Reggie Jackson out there. If you are not going to play Jamal, which I don't think you should, I think you should stagger KCP and AG. But if you're going to do it, there's no, like, if you're going to put Jamal out there, play Christian Brown. Like, I don't know.
I'll plant my flag on. I mean, Reggie does deserve a little bit of runway, but I don't think it's that much more. He's actually had a decent runway where I want to see it. If you're not playing a little bit better, I wouldn't mind trying to say like, okay, well, let's look at some other combinations, which by the way, include Michael Porter Jr. at the 4. We talk about staggering. I just wouldn't mind seeing him at the 4 against certain lineups and certain iterations. It's just so dynamic and he never plays that spot.
Let's take a break. We're going to come back. We'll talk about the game tonight versus the Toronto Raptors. We'll preview that quickly. Here on Locked On Nuggets, I've got to tell you about PrizePicks, which is so amazingly awesome. You pick 2 to 6 players, and if they'll score more or less than their PrizePicks projection, you can win up to 25 times your money on any entry. 2 guys to target tonight, I think, are Nikola Jokic, big surprise there, and OG Anunoby. I'll get into why in the second segment. No competing against other people. It's just you versus the projections available. They offer projections on any sport that you can watch in the world. How about cricket, Euro basketball, disc golf, boxing, MMA, WNBA, which starts soon, esports, basketball, soccer, along with all the big ones, NBA, NFL, MLB, starting soon, NHL, PGA, all of that. Entries can be made in 60 seconds or less. It's just that easy. Offer safe and fast withdrawals, and they're currently operational in over 30 states and Canada. Download the PrizePicks app or go to prizepicks.com to sign up today and play daily fantasy sports. First-time users receive a 100% instant deposit match up to $100 with promo code LOCKEDON. If you put in $100, PrizePicks will match you $100. You put in $50, they'll match you with $50. Don't forget to enter promo code LOCKEDON at sign up for an instant deposit match up to $100. We'll be right back on Locked On Nuggets. Back here on Locked On Nuggets, thanks for joining us and making us part of your day. We're going to talk a little bit about the game versus the Toronto Raptors on Monday night. So, Adam, I have laid the points with the Denver Nuggets in this one. I got the worst of the line. I laid the 7. It's down to 6.5 in some spots. A little bit of motion against the Nuggets. I understand that from the perspective, this is a letdown spot to a certain degree. You're coming off of one of the bigger wins of the season versus Memphis. You got 2 days off. Toronto, kind of a desperate team coming in. The big thing for me in this game, going back to last season when the Raptors came into Denver and got a win, is the Nuggets have to be great on the offensive glass tonight, or the defensive glass, rather. The only way this Raptors offense can really stay afloat versus Denver and hang is if you give them points off turnovers and second chance points. That's the only way that Toronto's offense can hang with Denver. So a lot of this game really is within Denver's control. It's going to depend on what their mentality is coming off that win on Friday.
The mentality is huge. Also, Michael Porter Jr. has been listed as questionable for tonight with a non-COVID related illness. So he may or may not be available tonight, which I don't know how much that would move a line or move betting odds, but it impacts it in some capacity. But I'm with you. Last Friday to me feels a little bit like the end of the important part of the regular season.
I said it. I said the same thing.
So it feels like I don't know how Denver feels. We had practice yesterday, and I went to it, and I asked Michael Malone, are you gunning for the 1 seed? And he said, no. It's much more important. I'll talk about this in the next segment. It's much more important to get there healthy. But I just wonder, like, Denver looked good because they were so locked in. How locked in are they tonight? It's Toronto Raptors. Game almost certainly doesn't matter. It is a home game, and you want to protect home court, but I just would not be surprised if Denver had a little bit of a C- game tonight, and you're like, well, what happened? Well, what happened is they're so comfortable in where they are that, it is what it is. So that's the thing that I'm kind of looking for tonight. Toronto is an interesting team. I don't know if they're particularly good, but they are desperate. I mean, who's the more desperate team tonight, Matt?
I mean, Toronto, 100%. Like
they're hanging by a thread.
Yeah, they can't. I mean, even they're in a little bit better shape than they were last week because they beat Chicago, and so now they've got this 3-game lead over the Bulls and tiebreaker, and the Pacers are kind of spiraling out. But like they've probably got hopes of making it actually into the 7-8 to give you a serious chance of making it out of the play-in. Winning, I think winning twice, especially if you win twice on the road in the play-in, that's a very difficult task. And so, yeah, they're going to be a lot more desperate. I'll be honest with you. I haven't been impressed with Toronto since the trade deadline. I just don't think that they've played well. They've played teams that tend to give you chances to win it if you give a good effort, and the Raptors have given better effort, which is like encouraging. But this is what's kind of, I think, interesting about this game is just a couple of years ago, it'd be like, well, this is Toronto. If you screw around, they're absolutely going to beat you. And kind of now I'm kind of like, I don't know. The gap between these two teams is real far. Like there's a big gap between Denver's floor and the Raptors ceiling. It's not that far apart. I think like probably the Raptors ceiling is above the Denver floor because that's how it is with most teams in the NBA. But like, it's not that far. Like if Denver plays average, they win this game by 10. If they play to capacity, it's like 20. If they really decide to screw around tonight, they can definitely lose and lose by 5.
All those things are true. This is like a zero pressure game. As a fan watching this one, I'm just kind of like, I don't know. I'd like them to win because it's fun when they win, but I don't.
I think this is going to be one of the problems. I'm curious to see what their approach is, like what their mentality is.
What would you guess?
I don't know, because I don't know that they're as wrapped up. I don't think that they view it the same way that we do, where we're like, they got it. I think that they're like, man, I don't know. If we don't like...
There's 18 games still. Yeah. They're
like
not doing the math in their head.
Exactly. That's the thing is like, that's why I started doing this is because you're like, well, there's 8, when you say that, like I told Katie the other night, Wingy, I was like, hey, magic number is 14. It was actually 13. Ryan Blackburn was right on because I forgot what tiebreaker. I was like, tiebreaker's 14. And she's like, that's a lot. And I was like, no. I was like, that's the thing is, no, it's not, because there's 19 games left. And so it's like, if you go 8 and 11, they've still got to go like an
almost undefeated. Yeah, almost undefeated. The thing I'm interested for tonight, it's silly. Will Barton's back in town. I know he's already been here, but he is the current 3-point record holder. Jamal Murray is 6 behind him, 7 to break. And I don't think Jamal Murray is going to make 7 threes tonight, but I do think he's going to try.
Nice.
Denver has home games tonight and then Wednesday at Chicago. I think between those two, he has a very good chance of breaking it in front of the home crowd. You don't want to break it at San Antonio.
No.
You don't want to set the new record there. You want to do it in a way where you can call a timeout and everybody celebrates and there's a cool moment. And hey, if the guy you're passing happens to be here as well and you get that moment, I think it'd be cool. So tonight, I think Jamal Murray comes out and guns for a lot of threes, and I'm kind of curious what that looks like.
I have 2 more quick notes. One, OG Anunoby leads the Raptors in corner 3-pointers per game. So watch for him on the weak side rotation to that corner that the Nuggets tend to give up shots to. And most notably, Scotty Barnes staggers with the second unit at the beginning of the second quarter. So while I just got done saying like I wouldn't necessarily overuse the AG at the 5 thing, they could definitely use an AG stagger into the second unit tonight to put AG on Barnes. Because otherwise, if he rolls out the 5-man bench lineup, the Raptors are going to be like a plus 15 or plus 11 in the first 4 minutes of that quarter. Like just straight up going to tell you, Scotty Barnes will, like, I'm not even that high on Scotty Barnes, and he will absolutely wreck that second unit if they don't put a stagger in to try and slow him down. Danny says, hey, off topic, but are there any Zeke updates?
Reevaluated in 2 weeks, which makes me think, I mean, reevaluate is always a tough one. He does. It's weird because you see him shooting and he looks okay shooting and everything. You wouldn't know it if you were just walked into practice, but that language makes me think he might be out for a bit. And then, honestly, 2 weeks from now, Matt, is it too late? Let's say it's a perfect bill of health in 2 weeks.
Yeah, it's been a while. And I think it's hard. If you're not one of the key rotation guys, it's hard to get back in Malone's rotation once you're out. It's been one of his problems. Malone's talked about that. He's like, in Malone's view, and we may not agree with it, or we may think he's lying. I think it's fair. But like, Malone's talked about how like Zeke's been hurt, and it's tough when you're coming back from injury because we've had guys in a rhythm in a rotation. Clement Esra on a good day.
Hold on, can I do this one in the last segment?
Sure.
Like, because that's part of it. But I want to say one thing. On Friday's DNVR postgame show, I called you the Apostle Paul, and because you at one point were a Jokic doubter, then you were a Jokic believer, then you were a Jokic mediator. But this like year's MVP, you and I have talked, it's kind of breaking you. And that some of the things that are being said are so absurd. And you're like, guys, what is going on here? Like, why is everybody so slow to just want to say like, no, this guy's having a great year. He's a great player. And it's the same with the Denver Nuggets. And so this is why I think it's kind of interesting is you're the reluctant convert, but now an apostle of some. I'm not saying that you're out here just standing, but that you're sort of coming from a position of like, look, guys, I get why you would be slow to agree, but some of the stuff is not about being slow to see it. It's being intentionally blind to it. And that's what I think is frustrating you. And so I just kind of thought it would be interesting to kind of hear your perspective on that right now, because the Nuggets, look, they haven't proven enough in the playoff for people just to buy in blindly. But the stuff people say is absurd, man. It's crazy, the narratives.
I care a lot about the arguments for an MVP. You have to choose either to not care about MVP at all or care a lot. That's where I came to when I started doing this full time. Was like, you're going to talk about it so much, you either have to be like, all right, I'm going to care about this. I'm just going to like devote myself to this part of this thing. Or you're going to be like, it's a stupid award about a sport where you throw the ball through the hoop. I decided to care about it. And so what's frustrating for me, honestly, it's frustrating that he's from Denver, so that I'm always going to be accused of that bias, and that's difficult. The intentionality really is part of it, where it's like, guys, I've made the argument without using stats. I don't have to use them. Okay. You can these talking points that get distributed are frustrating me, because I'm like, guys, just because you have a talking point doesn't mean that's the end of the discussion. Right? It's like, oh, well, Jokic doesn't play defense. Okay. Jokic isn't good.
Yeah, package it up. We're done.
Yeah, like Jokic isn't as good a defense as Giannis and Joel. Jokic is still not as bad a defense as you're making him out to be, and that changes the equation. I will say, like, I do some of the same stuff with Giannis, where I'm like, guys, you really got to understand like how amazing Giannis is offensively. Like, he's just dominant. But like, to me, it seems like wherever I have to get to, whatever I have to adopt to deny Jokic, that's where I will go, rather than seeking out the right answer. And that to me is just like the wrong way to pursue any knowledge. Like, look at the facts, do your research from trusted sources. Do your own research on Instagram. And then, come to a conclusion that fits all these things, but be thorough and be honest and be open to being wrong. I don't mean to be this much of a cliche, but be curious, not judgmental.
What it is, there you go. What there is there are legitimate and interesting arguments to be had, and they're not the ones that are ever presented. And that's, I think, what's so frustrating about it is it's like stat padding and hockey assists. It's just stuff that's like
hockey assists.
I know we're really reaching now, but
hockey assists.
I know. And then it was, well, I talked to a lot of coaches and they say the same thing. It's like, come on, man, come on.
I can never figure out RJ, because I've heard RJ talk up Jokic when people were downing him, and now that he's talked, like, maybe RJ and I are similar, and that we're like always trying to like equate the thing. But I can never figure out where RJ is on these kind of things. All right, let's take a break. We're gonna come back, and Adam's gonna talk to you a little bit about the last part of the season for the Nuggets and what that means. We'll do that when we come back on Locked On Nuggets. First, I need to tell you about Built Bar. Built Bar is a delicious treat without all the fat and calories. They're amazing. They're covered in 100% real chocolate. They come in great flavors like churro, peanut butter, brownie, and coconut almond. We don't know how they do it, but Built comes out with all these bars that taste like a candy bar, but with amazing macros. Only 130 calories, just 4 grams of sugar, but with 17 grams of protein. You don't have to wait around for a box now. We've been telling you about Built.com for years. Now you can go to your local Walmart or Sam's Club and get Built Bar. At your nearest Walmart, you can walk in, go to the pharmacy section, and grab yourself a box of Built Bars. You can get a 4-bar box of cookies and cream, double chocolate, or the coconut puffs. Or you can go to Sam's Club and get a 13-bar box with brownie batter or churro. Get the churro. The churro is amazing. Trust me, you will never go back after you have a Built Bar churro. It's amazing. Check them all out at Built.com. We'll be right back on Locked On Nuggets. Final segment here on Locked On Nuggets. Thanks for joining us, making us part of your day. I have to get out of here. I have a meeting. Adam is going to take you home the rest of the way. I'm going to set up his banners. I hope you guys have yourselves a great day. Adam's going to talk to you a little bit about the rest of the season for the Denver Nuggets. I'll see you guys again next time here on Locked On.
Alrighty, so question is now, what is left to prove, or what is there left to learn about the Nuggets over this last 18 games? And it is just 18 games. I want to first address the question that a lot of people have been asking, which is, why not go for the 1 seed? So we were at practice yesterday, a very light practice. Malone mentioned that after the All-Star break, the games when you're in playoff position, it's injuries become such a big concern that you don't even go 5-on-5 in practice. Even with 2 days off, you don't do any live drills that would include 5-on-5 because somebody rolls an ankle in a practice and you feel like an idiot. Michael Malone's exact language was, we'd like the 1 seed overall. We'd like it if it happens, great. But we're not going to put ourselves in position where we're going for that if it costs us our health or our rest even. And I think it's an interesting point because Denver is now, are they tied in the loss column? I think they might be tied. Nope, they're 1 behind Milwaukee. So they're tied in the win column, but 1 game in the loss column behind Milwaukee, and then 1 game up on the Boston Celtics. So you look at that and you go, it's close enough that if you did make a point of it, hey, we want to do this, you would have to kind of put your foot on the gas pedal. Right now, there are known players who are dealing with injuries. You know, Jamal Murray had the back tightness. He had the right knee swelling. Aaron Gordon's had the shoulder thing. You've got a couple guys that are knocked up or are banged up. But then there's also guys that, you know, throughout the course of the season, you don't know about every injury. You only know about the ones that keep a player out, and every player has a different level of pain tolerance. The Nuggets in the Jokic era have never been able to waltz into the playoffs. They've had 1 game at the end, 2 games at the end or something where they've been able to like manipulate the standings, but they've never had it where there's 18 games to go and they're able to sort of say like, let's make sure Nikola Jokic on game 1 of the playoffs feels as healthy as he can possibly feel. And that's the situation that they find themselves in. So then the question becomes, what's more important, the number 1 overall seed or 100% health going into the playoffs? I think it's the health part, and I don't think it's particularly close. Now, with that, you look at the Nuggets schedule and you say, I actually think the number 1 overall seed is more likely to be won in the next 2 weeks than it is later. And that is because the games coming up are so unimportant in terms of, you know, their Eastern Conference games. They've got Toronto, Chicago, San Antonio, Brooklyn, Toronto, Detroit, the Knicks, the Nets, Washington, Milwaukee, Philadelphia. That's all outside of the San Antonio game. That's all Eastern Conference games. How important are those? How locked in is Denver going to be? I don't know. If they happen to just win those ones, I do think when you get to the end of the season, even if those games are like, okay, now you're 1 game up on Milwaukee because you had a really good month of March. And now that you're in April and you play New Orleans, Phoenix, Golden State, Phoenix again, Utah, Sacramento, the games that, you know, presumably matter a little bit more and they're against West, then I wouldn't be surprised if Denver goes for it. But I don't think that you go for it now. This is the point where I think they say, I wouldn't be surprised if a player sits out, Jamal Murray misses a road trip, or, you know, a 1-game road trip against San Antonio, or Michael Porter misses this or that, for he's not feeling 100% healthy. All right, shut it down. But then the question somebody asks is, you know, if Denver plans on going to the finals this year, if you told me, can Denver beat Milwaukee in a series? If it's in Denver, I give them 60% chance. I like that matchup. I think Milwaukee's a good team. I think Denver is a better team. Are they a better matchup? They just match up well. Jokic will guard Giannis, believe it or not, some of the time, like instead of Brook Lopez. There'll just be some things that Denver, I think, can do. And then the passing has always given them problems. But if you told me they have to go to Milwaukee, now I think that becomes much more of a 45-55. Like, Milwaukee's a great team. You got to go on the road. That's tough. Boston is a tougher matchup for Denver. I know they're struggling right now. But if you told me Denver had to go to Boston for the series, I think it's 60-40 Boston, just because they have a great home court advantage. It's far, and they got some things they can throw at. If it's Denver, it's closer to 50-50 or 55-45. 76ers, exact same situation. You have to go on the road. Even though I like that matchup, you still have to go on the road. So for me, it does matter when you get to the finals. The question is, how much do you risk for a better shot in that series versus how much do you risk if it lowers your chances of winning in the first round, which I think Denver is honestly, I'm not going to say concerned about. I think the players are very confident. But it's one of those things you look at and say, logically, you don't want to have, oh man, Jokic is real banged up, Gordon's real banged up, and Murray rolled an ankle a week ago and he's not fully healthy. And now we have game one at home of an important first round series. I think that's where Denver's mind is. So like it or not, I think it's smart. But here's the thing. I think Denver will be in position either way. Milwaukee's a good team, and they just came off a 16-game win streak. But they're not like an unbeatable team by any means. They even just had a narrow win over Washington. Yes, it was the second night of a back-to-back, but I suspect that they're a team. They have games coming up against Brooklyn. They actually have the Magic, who's always tough. They have Brooklyn, Golden State, Sacramento, Phoenix. That's a tough run of games. Denver plays them again in Denver. That's a tough one. They've got Boston and Philadelphia on the schedule. They've got Memphis and Toronto on the schedule still. So they have a lot of challenges, and they're going to lose some games. And like I said, you get to the last 2 weeks, I think that's when Denver will decide, do we gun for this or do we not? And we'll go for it. The last thing is, and this is an interesting one, Denver has 46 wins. Their franchise record is 57. 58 would set it. That's 12 wins. That means if you go 12-6 down the stretch here, you set an all-time new franchise record. Is that right? 12-6. Yeah, 12-6. And who holds it right now? The 2013 Denver Nuggets, coached by one George Karl. Michael Malone and George Karl are rivals. I think I've talked about this before. George Karl lobbied for and then ultimately replaced Michael Malone when he was in Sacramento. I don't know that it's worth jeopardizing your season for. But again, if you get into those final 2 weeks of the season and you just need to go 4 or 5 down the stretch just to win it, even though there's less at stake, over in the Western Conference or whatever, I do think that there is something to the team going, hey, man, we have a chance to, regardless of what happens in the playoffs, we have a chance to set a franchise record for regular season wins. Why not go for it? So I think the temptation is going to be there for Denver. And then you talk yourself into it by saying, well, it's important to stay sharp and it's important to do this or that. My question is, can Denver do this over the next 2-3 weeks against these East Coast teams? And by the way, a lot of these on the road, they're going to have to go on the road here quite a bit over the next month, in the month of March. Can they do that while also resting? And I think this will be actually how it plays out. I think that tonight, if Michael Porter doesn't play, that's in addition to hey, he's just not healthy. Maybe he has this non-COVID illness. But maybe it's also like, hey, we just want to shut him down so that he's fresh. We don't want him playing more than 3 games in a week. So we'll set him down random games here. Murray, let's just not bring him to San Antonio. We could probably win in San Antonio while resting Murray. And if we lose that game, if we go to San Antonio and lose to San Antonio, who cares? It's not that big of a deal. So I think Denver will take that approach. Jokic will probably pick a spot. Murray pick a spot. Porter pick a spot. Gordon and KCP, who nobody talks about because he's not really has an injury. Knock on wood, he doesn't have one that makes it to the report. But I think there's something to, hey, he's played a lot of minutes this year. He's 31 years old. He could probably use a week off or something like that. So Denver will try to do it. And if they win those games, then late in the season, when you do have the measuring 6 games against Phoenix, against Golden State, I do expect that they'll go for it. And then lastly, you've got that Utah game I keep looking at on April 8th. I don't have a ton of faith in Utah, but I do think late in the season, Lakers, Jazz, those games are going to matter. And if Denver looks at the Lakers and the, tied with Utah basically with 2 games to go, Denver might look at that and go, yeah, we'll drop one to the Utah just to make it harder on the Lakers. So even if the Lakers make it into the playoffs, they have to play every game all the way up to the final buzzer and wear themselves out before ever making it to a first round. So I think that's it. That's how Denver will approach it. As for questions that need to be answered, I don't think there's any meaningful ones. Honestly, I think Denver has answered all the questions that I sort of had for them with this last game and the lead up to it. I mean, beating Cleveland, beating the Clippers, now winning this game against Memphis in the fashion that they did. They've answered them. They're ready for the playoffs. They have that gear. They can lock in. They can play defense when needed, get situational stops. Jokic can be more aggressive than what we've seen. He can pick his spots. Murray can score like Bubble Murray in pockets. So I don't think that there's any questions that, like, if they beat Toronto tonight with that same thing to do, am I more confident? Not really. I mean, I'm kind of already there. The one thing I will say is, and I don't expect Denver to pass this one, they're currently 15th, I believe, in defense. They've dropped a little bit recently, 15th in defensive rating. They're still within earshot of being a top 10. I don't think they'll get there, though. To be a top 10 defense, when you're at 15 means you would have to have 18 games consecutively of good defense. I don't think you can have 1 or 2 or 3 really bad defensive games and climb in the standings. So I think Denver's chances of being a top 10 defense by the end of the year, which, everybody, it's a talking point, but it's a talking point for a reason. There's a reason that, that it's important to be a top 10. It's been an indicator of what kind of teams have playoff success. It would be nice, but I just don't know. I expect Denver's going to put up a really, really bad defensive performance 1 or 2 times left this season. Actually, Denver is 12. Somebody in the comments says 12. So they were, let me see, what was I looking at yesterday that had them 15? If they're 12 at 113.0 and Minnesota is 112.9. So actually they are one good game away actually of being a top 10 defense. So there's a chance. I do suspect when I look at the calendar, they play Phoenix twice. Phoenix is going to be a very good offense. They play them twice at the end of the year, both times at Phoenix. How hard do you go in those games? Is it possible you get outscored? You rested Murray, you rested Jokic on one of those, and you give up 130, 140 points, and then can you survive that? If you have another game against, Philadelphia is a very good offense. You give up a big game there. Does it hurt you too bad with this short of a runway? Maybe a little bit. But it would be nice. It'd be really nice for them to enter the playoffs as a top 10 defense. And I just think it would be a good feel good thing. And then lastly, what else is there to learn? There are those measuring stick games where they play against the Warriors. They do the games that I would circle on my calendar are Milwaukee and Philadelphia. To me, those are MVP narrative games. I said that I thought Giannis had a great chance to steal the MVP. If they could have pushed their winning streak up to 20, it was at 16. They had the Philadelphia game, and then they had a couple easy ones after that. I said if they could win that game and get to a top 20 or to a 20-game win streak, that'd be good. It'd be like the 10th best winning streak in NBA history. That'd be a nice feather in his cap and a nice thing that you could point to and say, hey, here's why he's the MVP. Since they lost that game, we'll see. I don't think it's completely over, but I do think that Jokic is more likely. He's as likely to win as the Vegas odds reflect of him, meaning that he's a heavy favorite at this junction. But then you got the Milwaukee-Philadelphia games or measuring stick games for Jokic in particular, but for the Nuggets collectively. They've got the Phoenix games that'll be something of measuring sticks should they choose to play. The Warriors game, same thing. And then that Pelicans game I look at, if Zion gets back, that could be a potential first-round matchup as well. So there's little check marks along the way that I think make it interesting. Finally, you look at the standings. I see some people talking about the standings out west and like what is it you're hoping for. So much can change. Memphis right now is in free fall. They are only 1 game up right now, the 2 seed to the 3 seed. They're only 1 game up. I expect them to fall. I do not think Memphis is going to be the 2 seed. I think they will be the 3, and I would not be surprised if they were the 4. They're 4 games in the loss column up on the Phoenix Suns. I don't think Phoenix can pass them. I think Phoenix is good, guys, but I think they have some flaws. Like, they might put it together, but over the course of this regular season, I wouldn't be surprised if they underperform what I think the public's expectations is of them. They'll be very good in the playoffs if they can put it together, but Memphis is free falling. Sacramento is right there. Golden State lost last night to the Lakers, but I suspect that as they get Andrew Wiggins back and complete their roster, they'll have a run in them. So I would not be surprised if this standings, we've all been looking at the play-in and saying, well, there's a lot of volatility there. People will rise, people will fall. I wouldn't be surprised if there was volatility in the 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 part of this as well. And then lastly, the Clippers, they stormed back to beat Memphis last night, but that was a bit of a fraud off of 2 teams that have been free-falling. I would not be surprised if the Clippers, Mavericks, and Lakers all find their way to the play-in, which means one of those teams is going to be sent home packing. Should be really interesting. So that's it tonight. Toronto should be an interesting one. Hopefully Jamal Murray goes for that 3-point record. I think it would be a really cool moment, and it would make this game a lot more interesting. That does it for me today, guys. Hope you have a great one. Hit the like button on the way out. We'll see you tomorrow.